This is a lesson on functional harmony, the basics, lesson 2. In lesson 1 I talked about how chords are formed from a major scale. I also talked about intervals, and I also talked about how a chord is major because the third is major, and how a chord is minor because the chord has a minor third. So here's the major chord, and there was the third, which is a major third, and this was a minor chord, and it was minor because the third was minor. In today's lesson I'm going to talk about a very special relationship between the chord G, chord 5, and chord 1, which is C. Now that's if we're in the key of C. It's chord 5 because, as you may recall from the first lesson, that's because G is 5 notes higher than C. If we're in the key of F, the fifth would be C. So that would be chord 5 going to chord 1. Those two chords belong together. There are many reasons why they tend to pull towards each other. One of them often is said that because we just listen to a lot of Western music, which has its origins in classical music, that we've heard that so many times that that's what we expect. And yes, that is partly correct. But another reason for it is from physics. And I'm not going to go into a physics lesson now, but I'm going to give you an idea of why that might be. And I would advise you to look it up on the internet or investigate yourself if you're really interested in this side of music. But it's to do with acoustics, and it's to do with the harmonic series. And an example is if you take a string on a violin or a guitar or anything like that. If you lightly dampen the string and bow it, you will get a harmonic, and that harmonic will be an octave or a note, the same note. If you do it again, you'll get the same note at a different octave. If you do it again, so halve it again, the next note you'll hear is a fifth. So there, after halving it and halving it again, the next one is the interval of a fifth, so you will hear that interval. So it's everywhere. It's when things vibrate, those are the kind of intervals that you hear, the fifth. So going from the fifth, which in C is G, is partly to do with what we've heard, partly to do with physics. Another note that's very strong is the leading note, and the leading note is the seventh of which in C is B, and that is the third of the chord of G. So there's the chord of G, and that really pulls strongly to this note, which is the tonic or the chord 1. So we get this sound, and you've probably heard that in lots of pieces. Sometimes in classical music, actually from the classical era, there were composers that would literally hammer that out. And I think when I do it like that, it's really obvious that you've heard that a lot. So that's kind of explains why we hear those two very, very clearly. That's called a cadence, and a cadence is like a full stop. It's like a comma in a sentence. It makes the music feel like it's arrived somewhere. So this chord sequence is used a lot, obviously at the end of pieces, but also in the middle, sometimes just within certain sequences. And in the key of F, it would be. explains why chord 5 pulls strongly to chord 1. And that's something that you hear a lot of in music, but in jazz it's also very common. And in the next lesson I'm going to talk about how you can add other chords to that chord sequence 5-1, and you will get the chord sequence 2-5-1, which is in many jazz standards. It's in many types of music as well. And just talk about some of the names that are given to notes in a major scale, such as the tonic and the dominant. So that'll be in the next lesson.